Hey there, sleepyheads. If you're here right now, maybe it's late and your mind just needed a softer place to land. Maybe you're lying in bed, scrolling under dim lights, looking for something calm, familiar, maybe even comforting. If so, you're exactly where you should be. Tonight, we're not just talking about SpongeBob. We're going back to a feeling. Quiet mornings, warm blankets, cartoons playing softly in the background. Back when life felt lighter. So take a breath. Let the day fade. Pull your blanket a little closer. And let's begin. There was something peaceful about those mornings, when the sun hadn't fully shown up yet. The air felt cool, and the world outside still felt kind of asleep. You might remember walking into the living room with messy hair, still wrapped in yesterday's tiredness, just hoping the day would start slowly. Maybe the TV screen was already glowing, Nickelodeon logo floating gently, like it was waiting for you. But that wasn't the strange part yet. It was the quiet that made it special. No rush, no noise, just that first soft sound of the theme song. The fridge humming softly behind you. Cereal bowl in hand, cushions still warm from the day before. You didn't have to speak or think much. You just watched that underwater world drifting across the screen, like it knew how mornings were supposed to feel. Something about that moment stayed. Sometimes, those episodes felt like the first real thought of the day. Before school, before backpacks and homework, before anyone expected anything from you. There was Bikini Bottom, where everything seemed slower and rounder and easier to hold on to. You could hear distant cars outside, but they felt far away, almost like they didn't belong to your world yet. But that wasn't where it ended. Back then, cartoons felt different. They weren't distractions. They were resting spots. You could sit there with your legs curled on the couch and let SpongeBob's laugh carry you into the morning. It didn't ask anything from you. It just existed, like sunlight coming through blinds and soft stripes across the floor. You might have watched the same episode dozens of times, but it never felt old. Kind of like comfort never really ages. It just becomes quieter. There was always a moment during those mornings when time felt stretched, as if the seconds were moving underwater too. Maybe you looked toward the kitchen and saw your backpack waiting, or your school shoes by the door. But they didn't matter yet. SpongeBob took priority, even if just for those few minutes. But that feeling only grew stronger later. Maybe you remember the commercials, those colorful bursts that almost felt louder than the show itself. They reminded you that the day was getting ready to start. But Bikini Bottom pulled you back in, like it knew you needed just a little more time before facing everything waiting outside. The characters might have been silly, but they held steady while your thoughts were waking up. You might have felt something like this before, when silence felt safer than speech. And then, just as the sun finally lifted, you felt ready. Not strong, but ready. Like your breath had smoothed out, and you could step into the day a little easier. SpongeBob didn't fix problems or solve anything, but somehow, he made mornings softer. He made them livable, and maybe that was enough. Even now, when mornings feel heavier, or your thoughts feel cluttered, those memories stay tucked away, like a quiet blanket in the back of your mind. Bikini Bottom, soft light, gentle sounds, a kind of unspoken permission to start slow. And even if the world expects you to move faster now, part of you still remembers that other rhythm, that secret pace from early childhood mornings. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward, and that's where the story drifts next. There was always something familiar about the sound of the ocean in SpongeBob's world, even though most of us had never lived underwater. It wasn't really about waves or bubbles. It was more about the steady rhythm behind them, the kind that makes your shoulders relax without you even noticing. You might remember hearing those soft transitions between scenes, that little underwater whoosh that almost sounded like someone breathing slowly. You didn't realize it then, but it helped your own breathing slow down too. But that wasn't the strange part yet. Those sounds felt like background comfort, the kind you didn't have to focus on. They were just there, like a fan spinning gently in a bedroom at night, or the soft AC unit humming while you're trying to clear your thoughts. Sometimes, silence can feel loud, especially when you're young and your mind doesn't know how to stop thinking. But Bikini Bottom never felt silent. It felt steady. That feeling stayed. Even when characters were loud or chasing jellyfish, the world around them stayed calm. The colors were smooth and the audio never shouted at you. There was space between everything, like the show understood how a tired brain worked. You didn't need to understand why it felt relaxing. You just watched, maybe half asleep on a couch with a blanket that smelled like detergent, cereal bowl drying in the sink. But that wasn't where it ended. The ocean kind of works like white noise. It doesn't tell you what to feel. It just gives you space to let your own thoughts soften. Some nights, when falling asleep felt difficult, maybe you remembered those sounds without realizing it, like your brain kept them saved somewhere, just in case you needed them again. A gentle tide moving quietly, even when things felt busy around you in real life. Gee. There were moments in the show when nothing was happening at all. No action, no jokes, just a slow scene of Bikini Bottom sitting under the water. And those scenes felt like breathing room. You could almost hear distant cars outside your window, or the fridge humming softly in the kitchen. Real life and SpongeBob started to blur, like both worlds were slowing down together. People who overthink at night know that rhythm means everything. Too much silence feels heavy. Too much noise feels overwhelming. But Bikini Bottom sat somewhere in the middle, like a quiet space between thoughts. Not solving anything, just sitting with you until sleep felt possible. You might have felt something like this before, even if you didn't know what to call it. Back then, those simple sounds felt kind of magical. You didn't need headphones or guided meditation. You didn't even need to talk about how you felt. A cartoon did it for you, and maybe that's why so many people kept coming back to it. The ocean doesn't judge you. It doesn't rush you. It just moves at its own pace, inviting you to drift with it for a while. And if you listen closely, you can almost hear that same rhythm in real life. The AC at night, a ceiling fan turning, maybe the muffled noise of someone talking in another room. These aren't annoyances. They're anchors, signals that the world is still turning, even if your mind is wandering. SpongeBob understood that, without ever saying it. It didn't need to. Bikini Bottom became more than a cartoon setting. It was a soundscape, a kind of emotional soundtrack for people who didn't realize they needed one. It was calm, disguised as comedy. And in a world that always asks us to move faster, there's something healing about remembering a place that always moved slowly. But that feeling only grew stronger later, when other characters began to show what it meant to be heard, even in silence. And the story gently shifts toward that next. SpongeBob always seemed happy, like he carried sunshine in his pocket wherever he went. But if you look closely, there was another side too. Something quieter, tucked between the jokes and the laughter. He lived alone in that pineapple house, waking up every morning with a big smile, even when no one else was there to see it. His alarm would ring, the bed would bounce, and the day would begin like a celebration meant for one. But that wasn't the strange part yet. There were times when the house felt a little too still. You might remember scenes where the camera lingered on an empty room for just a moment longer than expected. No voices, no movement, just the echo of space. And somehow, it didn't feel sad. It just felt honest. That feeling stayed. Maybe some people saw a bit of themselves in that silence. The kind of person who tries extra hard to make each day bright, even when there isn't anyone around to share it with. SpongeBob laughed loudly, worked earnestly, dreamed boldly, all while living in a house that sometimes sounded bigger than he was. It wasn't dramatic, just real. Kind of like coming home after school when the house is empty, laying your backpack down, and hearing nothing but your own thoughts breathing beside you. Those moments were small, but they mattered, because even though SpongeBob wanted friends and fun, he knew how to stand alone too. He knew how to cook breakfast for just himself and still make it feel like a celebration. You might have felt something like this before, when you tried to make your own day special, without needing approval. But that wasn't where it ended. At night, his house looked different. Shadows stretched across the walls and the colors turned softer. It almost felt like someone waiting for a conversation that never came. He'd read books, blow bubbles, or just sit quietly at his desk with the window open. Sometimes the wind from outside could be heard, brushing softly against the curtains, and that stillness felt familiar, especially for nighttime thinkers who know that loneliness doesn't always mean sadness. Sometimes it just means noticing things others don't. There was a strange kind of strength in his solitude. He treated every moment like it deserved attention, even ordinary ones. He made work feel meaningful. He made dinner feel exciting. He made chores feel like adventures. And maybe that's why so many people kept watching. Not just for laughter, but for permission to care deeply about small things. For proof that you don't have to be surrounded by others to feel alive. You could almost hear the empty space between his footsteps sometimes, like the house itself was thinking. And maybe that's why the show felt comforting. It held room for people who thought a little differently, people who tried really hard without always knowing why, people who felt emotions so quietly that even they barely noticed them. SpongeBob carried loneliness with grace. Not as a burden, but as a part of being human, even if he wasn't. Some nights, when thinking turns heavy, those memories still return. The image of his pineapple house glowing gently against a blue sky, like a candle steady in a dark room. A reminder that solitude doesn't have to be bitter. It can be warm. It can have color. It can feel like belonging, even if no one else is there. And maybe that's what made SpongeBob quietly profound beneath the silliness. He didn't hide his heart. He let it shine, even when no one was watching. And that quiet resilience only grew more meaningful later, especially when friendships began to shape the silence into something new. It didn't end there. Something shifted softly afterward, and that's where the story drifts next. There were afternoons when school felt like a storm that didn't know how to stop. The hallways were too loud, the conversations moved too fast, and every classroom felt like a test, even when there wasn't one. By the time you made it home, you were kind of worn out from pretending everything was okay. But that wasn't the strange part yet. There was a moment that mattered more than you realized. Dropping your backpack on the floor. Hearing that small thud that sounded like a sigh. Maybe the house was quiet. Maybe it wasn't. But the day felt like it finally slowed down. Shoes off, snack in hand, and the TV was waiting, like it already knew you needed somewhere else to be for a while. That feeling stayed. SpongeBob was more than a cartoon in those moments. It was a place between responsibilities, a soft corner of the afternoon where nothing was required of you. You could lean back on the couch, or lie sideways with a pillow under your head, and let Bikini Bottom catch your thoughts before they got too heavy. The ocean sounds, the bright colors, the familiar voices, they held space when your mind couldn't. You might have felt something like this before, even if you didn't know how to explain it. There was something about watching cartoons while the sun was still up. The light outside felt softer, like the sky itself was tired too. The fridge might have been humming in the kitchen, or maybe you heard distant cars passing by outside. Everything in real life kept moving, but you didn't have to. Not for a while. But that wasn't where it ended. Sometimes, the episodes didn't even matter. You might not remember the plot, but you remember how it felt to sit there and let the world quiet down. SpongeBob laughing, Patrick being confused, Squidward sighing like a tired grown-up who needed a vacation. And strangely, each one of them made it easier to breathe. It wasn't about understanding the characters. It was about letting them carry some of the noise in your head. Escaping didn't mean running away. It just meant pausing life long enough to feel human again. SpongeBob helped with that. Not in big, heroic ways, but in small, gentle ones. It let you be silent without feeling alone. It let you rest without asking permission. It didn't matter if the day had been tough or confusing. Bikini Bottom always left the door open. Those after-school moments became tiny lifelines. Even now, you might find pieces of them buried in memory. The taste of off-brand cereal. The sound of the remote clicking. Maybe the sun was setting a little earlier than usual. Or maybe streetlights started flickering through half-closed blinds. Childhood didn't always feel easy, but those afternoons made it feel manageable. And the best part was that you didn't have to say how you felt. You didn't need words for social pressure or school anxiety or loneliness. A cartoon did the talking. The characters made chaos look funny, made confusion seem okay, and made trying again tomorrow feel possible. SpongeBob didn't fix anything, but it helped make things livable. And sometimes, that's all a tired heart needs. Looking back now, those escapes were more than breaks. They were little acts of survival, the quiet kind, the kind where you sit on the couch and let your brain breathe for the first time all day. The kind where hope doesn't arrive as a speech. It arrives in the sound of bubbles, the shape of a pineapple house, and the way underwater life always found a reason to smile. It didn't end there. Something deeper waited beneath those afternoons, like a truth you didn't see until years later. And that's where the story drifts next. SpongeBob's pineapple house was never just a piece of set design. It was bright, a little odd, and somehow welcoming even when nothing was happening inside. The colors didn't match the real world. The shape didn't follow any logic. And maybe that's why it felt like home to so many people. It was a place that didn't make sense, but still belonged. Kind of like the people watching from couches in bedrooms, trying to make sense of their own hearts. But that wasn't the strange part yet. The house never tried to be perfect. It just stood there, glowing softly against the ocean backdrop. Every morning, SpongeBob woke up inside it with excitement in his voice, like he'd already decided that today was worth celebrating. It didn't matter that he lived alone. It didn't matter that his dreams didn't always work out. He still treated his home like it was something special. That feeling stayed. Maybe that's why the pineapple meant more than people realized. It was a symbol of effort, of showing up, of making life warm, even when things felt confusing or lonely. A lot of viewers, especially the quiet ones, found comfort in that. Not because the house was grand, but because it was enough. You might have felt something like this before, searching for belonging in places that others overlooked. But that wasn't where it ended. Sometimes the house was shown at night, lit gently from the inside. That glow felt familiar, like a small lamp left on during a rainstorm. You could almost hear the distant ocean waves, like a soft heartbeat around the building. Those scenes had no dialogue, no jokes, just a calm image of a home that refused to dim, even when everything outside was dark. You might remember looking at it and feeling your shoulders relax just a bit. Home isn't always a physical place. Sometimes it's a memory. Sometimes it's a voice. And sometimes it's a fictional world on a TV screen. The Pineapple House was never big or impressive, but it always felt safe. It reminded you that life can be strange and still beautiful, that loneliness doesn't have to be cold, that trying is its own kind of strength. It offered quiet proof that belonging doesn't mean fitting in perfectly. It just means feeling at ease, even for a moment. Back when things were harder to understand, Bikini Bottom felt like that safe corner of the mind you retreated to without realizing it. After school afternoons, tired evenings, long summer days when the world outside felt too wide, there was that house again, waiting without judgment. SpongeBob stood at the door, smiling like he was genuinely happy to see you, and maybe he was. Those memories linger, even now. Sometimes they surface when life feels scattered, or when you're lying awake in bed, listening to distant cars outside. You might remember that pineapple and realize it represented more than cartoon logic. It represented a feeling that every kid needed at least once, the chance to be welcomed somewhere, even if that place only existed on a screen. The chance to feel safe, without explanation. Home, in its quietest form, is a place where trying never looks foolish, where effort is enough, where warmth can exist even in solitude. SpongeBob taught that, without ever saying it. His house stood as a small reminder that hearts don't need grand spaces to feel okay. They just need room to breathe. And maybe that's why so many people still think about that pineapple house today. It wasn't about realism. It was about comfort. It was about showing up each day and choosing optimism even when things felt heavy. It didn't end there. Something deeper waited beyond the house, just outside the door. And that's where the next chapter quietly begins. Patrick was never the smartest in the room, and he never tried to be. He didn't come with advice or speeches or big plans. He just showed up. And sometimes, especially when life felt confusing, that was more than enough. His friendship was simple, but steady, like the kind you don't notice in the moment, but remember years later. But that wasn't the strange part yet. His presence felt like quiet loyalty. He didn't ask SpongeBob to be different. He didn't judge when things went wrong. Even when he was clueless, his heart always seemed warm. That type of character mattered more than people realized. In a world that feels loud and demanding, Patrick reminded us that sometimes the most healing thing is just knowing someone will sit beside you, even if they don't know what to say. That feeling stayed. Maybe that's why so many people connected with him without realizing it. There are friends who talk a lot, and then there are the ones who don't need to. Patrick fit into the second group. His silence never felt uncomfortable. He had a way of making space feel safe. You might have felt something like this before, during a moment when words felt too heavy, but company still felt needed. But that wasn't where it ended. Patrick's loyalty was quiet but powerful. He'd follow SpongeBob into plans that didn't make much sense, and he never complained when things went wrong. That kind of friendship is rare, especially as people grow older and expectations become complicated. Patrick didn't analyze problems. He just stayed close, and sometimes that meant more than any solution could have. There were scenes when SpongeBob was upset or unsure, and Patrick wouldn't say anything wise. He'd just tilt his head and listen, even if he didn't understand. But somehow that was enough, because real comfort isn't always about answers. It's about presence. It's about letting someone exist as they are, without trying to fix every part of them. Patrick did that naturally. Childhood memories often look like this. Not deep conversations, but moments of quiet companionship. Sitting on a couch during a sleepover while the TV played cartoons. Walking home from school together without talking much. Lying awake and listening to a friend's breathing in the dark, knowing the silence meant safety. Patrick felt like all those memories wrapped into one steady character. And maybe that's why his role mattered so much. He showed that kindness didn't need to be loud. He proved that friendship could be clumsy and still meaningful. Viewers who felt different or shy might have seen a kind of reflection in him, even if they didn't know it at the time. His loyalty didn't need explanations. It just needed a place in the story. You could almost hear it in the still moments between scenes, when Bikini Bottom quieted down, and Patrick stood beside SpongeBob without a plan. It was like the show was saying that sometimes showing up is the most powerful thing a person can do. And maybe you've known someone like that. Or maybe you've been that person, offering heart instead of words. Patrick's presence became a form of emotional safety. Not dramatic, not perfect, just real. And in its own gentle way, it taught an important truth. Friendship doesn't always need to be understood. Sometimes it just needs to be felt. Patrick never tried to be the hero, but in his quiet loyalty, he ended up becoming one. and the meaning of that friendship only deepened over time, especially when silence began to speak louder than words. It didn't end there. Something else began to grow beneath those quiet moments. And that's where the story drifts next. There were episodes when SpongeBob and Patrick didn't say much at all. They just walked around Bikini Bottom, not chasing any adventure, not fixing any problem, just moving through the day together like silence was its own kind of language. Those moments didn't need dialogue to feel full. They felt like peace. But that wasn't the strange part yet. Sometimes, the best friendships aren't built from conversations. They grow in the quiet in between. A walk home after school, when both people are tired, sitting at a bus stop with nothing left to talk about, sharing a snack while watching TV, hearing only the crunch or the hum of the living room air. Those memories might come back not as full scenes, but as feelings, quiet ones that drift in like warm photographs. That feeling stayed. Patrick and SpongeBob had that kind of silence. It never felt awkward, just steady. SpongeBob didn't need to explain his thoughts, and Patrick didn't need to grasp them. They just existed beside each other. And that kind of connection, especially for people who overthink or worry about saying the perfect thing, was something deeply comforting. You might have felt something like this before, sitting with someone and realizing that words weren't always necessary. But that wasn't where it ended. The show had moments when the camera held still. No music, no jokes, just a wide shot of the ocean floor, or the two of them strolling down a road. That pacing was unusual for cartoons, but it felt right. It gave space. It gave breath. It reminded viewers that real friendship sometimes radiates strongest when nothing needs to happen at all. Those still scenes were like gentle reminders that being quiet doesn't mean being distant. SpongeBob didn't judge Patrick for not knowing what to say, and Patrick didn't pressure SpongeBob to keep the energy high. They trusted silence to hold the moment together. You could almost hear the distant cars outside your own window during those pauses, like the show somehow matched the rhythm of real life. As viewers, especially introverts or deep thinkers, those scenes might have offered relief. Social pressure often whispers that silence equals awkwardness. But SpongeBob and Patrick showed something different. They showed that silence can be warm. It can be shared. It can be enough. There's something special about being near someone who doesn't expect you to perform. Someone who doesn't need explanations or perfect timing. Sitting beside a friend on a couch with a bowl of chips, hearing only crunches and occasional laughter from a cartoon, can become a sacred kind of memory. It's quiet, but meaningful. It's wordless, but full. Patrick's presence in those calm moments made space for people who didn't always want to talk. Kids who stayed quiet during class. Teens who didn't know how to express everything they felt. Adults who sometimes struggle to find words for heavy thoughts. Bikini Bottom didn't rush them. It let them rest. Comfortable silence has its own heartbeat. It feels like a soft tide coming in and going out without needing applause. SpongeBob and Patrick understood that, even if they never said it. They walked together without reason. They sat together without expectation. And in that stillness, their friendship felt most real. Looking back, those moments may remind the listener of simpler afternoons. A lazy summer day with nothing to prove, sitting in a backyard, feeling the grass press against your palms. a sleepover when lights were turned off, conversations slowly fading, leaving only breathing and distant laughter somewhere in the house. Those scenes didn't try to be memorable. They just were. And those quiet stretches in SpongeBob's world helped shape the emotional rhythm of the show. Silence wasn't emptiness. It was presence. And later, that presence would help make difficult moments easier to carry. It didn't end there. Something deeper was quietly forming, and that's where the next part begins. Patrick was often labeled the clueless one, the friend who didn't quite understand what was going on. But sometimes, he said things that lingered. Not wise in the usual way, but in a softer way. A kind of honesty that slipped out between jokes. A line said once, then forgotten by everyone except the person who needed to hear it. But that wasn't the strange part yet. His simplicity felt peaceful. Patrick didn't rush to analyze everything. He didn't get tangled in worries or heavy thoughts. He woke up, lived his day, and didn't carry invisible weight on his shoulders. To viewers who overthought life, maybe that felt like a kind of gift. The gift of existing without complication. That feeling stayed. Sometimes, SpongeBob panicked or worried over something small, and Patrick would say something random that somehow made everything feel easier. Not the right answer, but just enough to help the moment breathe. There's a quiet kind of wisdom in that. A reminder that sometimes clarity arrives when we stop trying so hard to find it. You might have felt something like this before, when a friend said something silly during a heavy moment, and somehow it helped everything loosen. But that wasn't where it ended. Patrick didn't try to be insightful. That might be what made his words meaningful. They came naturally, unfiltered. He didn't overthink them, or worry how they sounded. He just spoke from a place most people forget as they grow older, a place where honesty still feels safe, where laughter doesn't need permission. His view of the world wasn't broken. It was just quieter. There were times when his simplicity looked like strength. He didn't worry about what others thought of him. He didn't chase success or perfection. He valued friendship and fun. He focused on what was near instead of what was missing. And maybe people who felt misunderstood saw a reflection of themselves in him, or at least the version of themselves they wished they could be. The world often celebrates people who work the hardest or think the deepest. But Patrick showed another side, the beauty of simple existence, the calmness of not knowing every answer, the relief of not needing one. SpongeBob was energy, Squidward was worry, but Patrick was ease. He floated through life like it was a river, never fast, never forced, just steady enough to stay afloat. There's comfort in simple thinkers. They remind us that life doesn't always need complexity to have meaning. Sometimes, the heart already knows what the mind tries too hard to figure out. Patrick made mistakes, but he didn't let them define him. He forgot them, moved on, and laughed again. Not careless, just free. Growing up often means learning to carry invisible weight. Expectations, fears, comparisons. Patrick didn't carry any of those. His character felt like a memory of a time when being yourself was enough. Maybe it reminds listeners of early summer mornings when nothing needed to be achieved, or of childhood moments when smiling didn't feel like work. Even if those times didn't last long, they left traces behind. Patrick's secret wisdom wasn't written in lines. It was written in ease, in unguarded moments, in the way he showed up for others without needing to impress them. He taught that being genuine can be more powerful than being perfect, and that thinking less isn't ignorance. It can be peace. And maybe that's why his presence mattered more the longer the show went on. As problems got bigger and worries grew louder, Patrick's simple heart stayed steady. It reminded viewers that overthinking doesn't always lead to clarity, and silence never makes you smaller. It didn't end there. His gentle influence would continue to shape everything around him, especially when home became something deeper. And that's where the story quietly heads next. Patrick lived under a rock, and at first glance, it seemed like a running joke. A house with no doors, no windows, no decorations, just a rock lifted up like a lid on a jar. But maybe that meant more than we realized when we were younger. It wasn't flashy or impressive. It was small, quiet, and closed off from the world. Yet somehow, it always felt like enough. But that wasn't the strange part yet. Many kids create their own little hideaways. A blanket fort in the living room, a closet with a flashlight and a stack of books, a corner of a bedroom where toys were lined up like a secret army. These places didn't need approval. They just needed to exist. They offered a quiet space when everything else felt too loud. That feeling stayed. Patrick's rock was like that. A simple shelter, a place where the world couldn't follow him. It wasn't designed well, and it didn't try to impress anyone, but it held warmth. He could rest there. He could sleep there. He could be himself there. You might have felt something like this before, when a small space felt safer than a big one. When staying tucked away felt better than going out. But that wasn't where it ended. There's something soothing about enclosed places. Being surrounded can sometimes feel calming, like the world outside is pressing pause, just for a moment. Maybe that's why some people still like heavy blankets, headphones, or dim lighting. It creates a sense of gentle protection. Patrick didn't need luxury. He needed quiet, and his rock gave him that. His home had a strange charm. It looked plain, but it carried heart, like the kind of childhood memory that doesn't immediately stand out, yet suddenly appears years later with surprising clarity. You might remember the scent of old carpet, or the way afternoon light fell across the floorboards. Small details that didn't matter then, but somehow matter now. Patrick never apologized for his home. He didn't need to. It reflected who he was. Simple, content, comfortable in his own company. That kind of confidence, the quiet kind, is something many people search for their whole lives. In Patrick, it existed naturally. There were episodes when SpongeBob visited, and the inside of the rock turned out to be bigger than expected. Furniture appeared, pictures on the wall, a living space that only showed up when someone was there to see it. That felt familiar too. Sometimes, parts of us only show when we feel safe enough to reveal them. Sometimes, we open up only when someone gently knocks. Patrick's home became an emotional metaphor. It showed that peace doesn't always require change. Sometimes, it requires stillness. The world teaches us to chase more, but Patrick showed the beauty of resting where you are. His rock wasn't hiding. It was healing. For listeners who once built imaginary worlds or kept secret corners, this might stir something quiet inside. The memory of being under a blanket during a storm, listening to wind against the window, the feeling of closing a door just to breathe. Those were small acts of emotional survival. They didn't solve every problem, but they gave the heart a place to rest. Patrick's rock was just that, a resting place, a shelter from noise, a reminder that safety doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to exist. And sometimes, the smallest spaces hold the biggest comfort. As the show continued, his home would play a deeper role. Not as a punchline, but as proof that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's quiet, hidden, waiting beneath a rock until the world feels safe again. It didn't end there. Something would rise from that stillness, and that's where the story softly moves next. Patrick was never the hero of the story. He wasn't the smartest, or the strongest, or the character with the biggest dreams. Yet somehow, he stayed in our hearts without trying. We didn't talk about it much, but we felt it. He never led anyone, never solved every problem, but he stood beside the people who needed him, and that was enough. But that wasn't the strange part yet. He didn't chase attention. He didn't try to be impressive. Patrick simply shows up. And for people who struggle with self-worth or feel like they don't stand out, that kind of character offers quiet hope. It tells them that value doesn't have to be loud. It can live in small actions, in the way someone listens, waits, or stays. That feeling stayed. There's something comforting about someone who doesn't need you to be anything more than you already are. SpongeBob never had to earn Patrick's loyalty. He never had to prove himself. Their friendship wasn't built on achievements. It was built on presence. You might have felt something like this before, when someone accepted you even on your tired days, or when just being nearby felt like enough. But that wasn't where it ended. Patrick understood loyalty without ever talking about it. He showed support even when he didn't understand the situation. He followed SpongeBob into messes, celebrated his small wins, and never judged him for his flaws. A lot of people long for that kind of love, the kind that says, "I'll be here," even if things don't make sense. That kind of care often goes unnoticed, yet it stays in memory longer than most grand gestures. He didn't care about being special. He cared about being present. And that kind of attitude feels rare in a world that always pushes people to stand out, to be unique, to prove themselves. Patrick quietly reminded us of a different truth. Maybe being valuable isn't about being extraordinary. Maybe it's about being steady. Some viewers might have seen a version of themselves in Patrick, even if they didn't realize it. People who weren't always praised, who didn't win first place, who weren't the loudest in the room, but who stayed, helped, listened, or waited. People who loved deeply, but quietly. And maybe that is its own kind of strength. There were times in the show when Patrick said something genuinely kind out of nowhere. Not wise, not poetic, just sincere. Those lines didn't try to impress. They just made things feel lighter, like a friend saying it'll be okay, even if they don't know how. Comfort sometimes speaks through simple words. Childhood memories often work the same way. A friend waiting for you after school, someone handing you half their snack, a person who walked beside you without needing to talk. These aren't big moments, but they matter. They plant reminders that love doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just stays in the room. Patrick was never framed as a hero, yet his kindness held the emotional backbone of many episodes. He was steady, loyal, always nearby. And maybe those qualities don't get celebrated enough in life. But when someone like that is gone, their absence speaks louder than any achievement could. That's probably why we loved him without realizing it, because his character made it easier to breathe, easier to exist, easier to feel okay, without explanations. Bikini Bottom taught us that friendship doesn't always sparkle, but sometimes it gently holds you up when you don't even know you're falling. And as the currents of the story begin to shift, we start to notice a deeper layer forming, one that reaches beyond individual characters. It didn't end there. The next chapter carries a different kind of weight, one that quietly grows with age. Squidward never shouted his pain. He didn't throw tantrums or make scenes. He just sighed, the kind of sigh that felt like it had history behind it. He moved slowly, like every step needed permission, and his eyes always seemed a little older than the rest of Bikini Bottom. That wasn't bitterness. It was something softer, something a lot of people grow into without realizing. But that wasn't the strange part yet. There comes a time in life when mornings start to feel heavy. Not painful, necessarily, just slower. You wake up, and the day already feels decided. You know the routine before it begins. The same commute, the same tasks, the same conversations sometimes. Squidward lived in that rhythm every day. He didn't cry about it. He didn't explain it. He simply carried it. That feeling stayed. When we were younger, Squidward looked like the grumpy neighbor, but as people got older, something quietly shifted. His sighs started to feel familiar. His slumped posture made sense. Even the way he brewed coffee, as if he were bracing himself for the world, looked strangely relatable. You might have felt something like this before. Standing in your kitchen, hearing the fridge hum softly, knowing today might look exactly like yesterday. But that wasn't where it ended. Squidward didn't hate life. He was just tired from living it. There's a difference. He still dreamed. He still cared about art and music. He still held on to pieces of hope. But the weight of expectations sat on him like a quiet shadow. He didn't complain. He simply endured. That kind of quiet burnout is easy to miss because it doesn't ask for attention. It just quietly sinks in, like dim morning light through blinds. His character represented a phase of life many faces eventually wear. The moment when excitement starts to fade, and responsibility begins to echo louder than curiosity. Not hopelessness, just a softer kind of fatigue. Adults know this feeling. It doesn't always arrive with sadness. Sometimes it arrives with acceptance. There were scenes when Squidward sat alone in his house, staring at nothing in particular. No music playing, no conversation, just the soft blue shading of his room, and the feeling of existing. Those moments felt like adulthood captured in a single frame. Not tragic, just honest. He didn't ask for sympathy. He just wanted peace. Some viewers saw themselves in SpongeBob, chasing optimism. Others found comfort in Patrick, floating freely. But Squidward held a reflection for people who felt the quiet weight of growing up. For those who kept trying, even when the spark wasn't always there. For those who showed up to work, paid bills, managed responsibilities, and still found small pockets of time to hope that life might change someday. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes with routine. The kind that doesn't shout. It just lingers. Squidward embodied that loneliness, not dramatically, but gently. The kind that makes you stare out a window at nothing and wonder when things started feeling heavier. The kind that makes silence feel both comforting and complicated. Yet, beneath all of that, Squidward still cared. His clarinet, his art, his tiny bursts of creativity, those things kept him going, even when nobody noticed. And maybe that's the quiet lesson behind him. Even tired souls hold on to something. A dream, a hope, a soft belief that maybe one day things might change. For a lot of adults, growing up doesn't mean losing imagination. It just means carrying it differently. Squidward carried his in sighs, in tired eyes, in moments of solitude. And in that way, he became one of the most human characters in Bikini Bottom, without ever saying so. It didn't end there. As we look deeper into his world, we begin to see that even quiet exhaustion can hold meaning. And that's where the story gently leads next. Squidward's clarinet was easy to laugh at when we were kids. It squeaked, wailed, and rarely sounded like real music. But when the room was quiet, and he lifted it to his mouth, something shifted. The camera slowed. His eyes softened. That wasn't comedy. That was someone trying. Someone holding onto a piece of themselves that the world never bothered to understand. But that wasn't the strange part yet. The clarinet wasn't there for performance. It was there for survival. Squidward kept it close, like it held the last sparks of his imagination. Maybe he knew he wasn't great at it, but that didn't matter. It was his sound, his rhythm, his way of remembering he was more than the routine he lived in. That feeling stayed. A lot of people have things like that. An old guitar that never left the case. A sketchbook with doodles that never became full drawings. A notebook with ideas that never turned into stories. These things don't always exist for anyone else's approval. They exist to remind the heart that it still knows how to reach for something. You might have felt something like this before. Holding on to a hobby that doesn't impress anyone, but keeps a small part of you alive. But that wasn't where it ended. Squidward practiced, even when nobody was listening. He failed often, and he knew it. But he kept trying, not out of pride, but out of quiet need. Creativity doesn't always show up with applause. Sometimes it arrives in solitude, in the moments when you feel most invisible. That's when expression matters most. When Squidward played that clarinet alone, it felt like his way of saying, I still exist. And sometimes, that's enough. There were scenes when the sound of his clarinet floated through the water late at night, uneven and imperfect. It didn't sound beautiful, but it sounded true. And maybe that's what art really is. Not perfection, but presence. Not skill, but effort. Real life has a way of muffling those parts of us, the ones that still want to create. Squidward never let them disappear. People often chase success, but sometimes the quietest dreams hold the most meaning. They don't ask for recognition or trophies. They just need space, a little time, a little forgiveness. Squidward's clarinet asked for nothing more than that. It was a voice when words didn't work, a place to rest his feelings when the world felt too heavy to explain. The sound of that lonely instrument connected deeply with anyone who ever felt misunderstood. Listeners who spend late nights writing, drawing, practicing, or dreaming might understand this instinct well. creation isn't always about showing the world. Sometimes it's about keeping something inside you alive. Squidward played not to impress, but to breathe. It's easy to forget small passions when life gets busy. Responsibilities often push creativity to the side. But those passions have a strange power. They can hold us together even when nothing else does. Squidward's clarinet wasn't a punchline. It was a lifeline. A reminder that even tired hearts still reach for meaning. If you've ever found yourself playing music with no audience, or sketching something just for yourself, or typing words late at night when nobody will read them, maybe you understand Squidward more than you thought. You don't need to be great. You just need to feel something. And sometimes, trying is the most powerful act of all. The clarinet wasn't his weakness. It was his courage. And the more we grow up, the more that becomes clear. It didn't end there. The next part leads us into the quiet moments when hope flickers inside even the most exhausted hearts. And that's where the story breathes onward. There were moments when Squidward's face softened. Not a full smile, just a small shift, like his features forgot to stay tired. These weren't big episodes or life-changing events. They were tiny scenes, almost easy to miss. A jellyfishing trip when the weather was calm. A quiet sunset that made the sky glow like watercolor across Bikini Bottom. It looked like he forgot, even just for a moment, to be annoyed. But that wasn't the strange part yet. Those small changes mattered. They showed that Squidward didn't hate happiness. He just didn't always have enough energy to hold on to it. There was kindness hidden beneath the sighs and frustration, the kind that surfaces when nobody expects it. People who hold back their emotions might recognize that feeling, the one where joy flickers in the background, but never fully rises. That feeling stayed. Sometimes it happened when SpongeBob or Patrick weren't looking, when Squidward stood alone in a quiet spot, maybe outside his house, maybe near the water, just looking out and letting his mind rest. A light breeze, the sound of ocean waves, maybe distant chatter from the crusty crab drifting through the air. You might have felt something like this before, when peace arrived without warning and didn't ask you to explain anything. But that wasn't where it ended. Even during some of the adventures, Squidward let his guard down. He laughed once in a while, a real laugh, usually brief and almost surprised, as if happiness accidentally escaped his chest before he could block it. Watching that felt like spotting a rare animal, unexpected and strangely emotional. Squidward kept his defenses high, but those defenses weren't built from anger. They came from exhaustion, from disappointment, from trying and not always finding results. For people who hide their joy, that makes sense. When effort doesn't always give you what you hope for, sometimes it feels safer to stay quiet. Squidward didn't dislike happiness. He just didn't trust it. But when he did let joy in, even for a moment, it felt meaningful. Not dramatic, not loud, just real. A brief spark, a reminder that he still remembered how to feel. The sunset episodes especially captured that, with golden light spreading across his face, and the music softening under the waves. It looked like he was remembering something from long ago, maybe something he missed without realizing it. There were times when SpongeBob invited Squidward into joy, whether he wanted it or not. And sometimes, even if only for a second, Squidward accepted it. You could see it in his eyes, the tension loosening. the corners of his mouth turning just slightly upward. Not fully happy, but not entirely burdened either. Just human. Viewers who hold back their emotions might relate to this deeply. The idea that warmth still lives inside, even if it doesn't come out often. That joy isn't gone. It's just quieter. Squidward felt like a reminder that people aren't always what they appear to be. Behind his frown, there was a person still trying. Friends like SpongeBob and Patrick didn't change him instantly, but they gave him moments. And sometimes, a moment is enough. A brief smile might not fix everything, but it proves that happiness still exists within reach. Maybe that's what made those scenes so touching, even if they passed quickly. Squidward didn't transform overnight. He didn't become bubbly or cheerful, but he did have tiny flickers of hope, and those flickers meant more as the show continued. They showed that even the tired ones, the quiet ones, still carry light inside them. It just takes the right moment, the right silence, or the right friend to bring it out. And maybe that's why Squidward's character grew deeper over time. Not because he changed completely, but because he never stopped having the potential to. It didn't end there. Something else began to surface. Something even quieter. And that's where the story drifts next. Sometimes Squidward wanted to be great. You could hear it in the way he spoke about art and music, like he believed there was something beautiful inside him that no one else could see. His voice changed slightly when he talked about his dreams. It softened. It sounded hopeful. But that was also the moment when it sounded loneliest. But that wasn't the strange part yet. There's a unique kind of pain that comes from trying hard and still feeling invisible. Squidward knew that feeling. Many people do. You spend hours practicing something you love, imagining how it might one day matter. But real life doesn't always notice. Applause doesn't always come. And when the silence arrives instead, it can feel heavier than any failure. That feeling stayed. Squidward's frustration wasn't always anger. It was disappointment. Quiet disappointment. The kind that sinks in during late-night hours when you're sitting alone in your room, replaying the day in your head, wondering why effort didn't become recognition. You might have felt something like this before, when you shared your work hoping someone would understand, and instead, it passed unnoticed. But that wasn't where it ended. He wanted someone to care, not about everything, just about something. A painting, a song, a moment of expression. His clarinet solos weren't meant to impress the world. They were meant to remind him that he still mattered, even when no one was listening, especially then. Nighttime thinkers know what this feels like, lying in bed while distant cars drift by outside. The clock ticks louder than expected. You start wondering if anyone ever really sees the parts of you that mean the most. Maybe you've stayed up late drawing or writing, pouring something real into a quiet space, only to close the notebook because you weren't sure it was worth sharing. That kind of silence follows you around. Squidward carried that silence everywhere. Not as a costume, but as a reminder. He wasn't bitter without reason. He was unrecognized, unheard, but still trying. That takes strength, even if it doesn't look heroic. He often watched SpongeBob and Patrick with a mix of envy and exhaustion. They didn't need validation to be happy. Their joy wasn't built on performance. It simply appeared. For Squidward, happiness seemed like something earned rather than experienced. He wanted proof, a sign, a reason to believe that what he loved had meaning. That quiet longing can live deep inside someone. It doesn't shout. It just waits. You could see it when Squidward looked at his own artwork with tired eyes. He believed he could be more. But belief alone doesn't erase loneliness. Some of the saddest moments in the show were the ones without words. Just a close-up of Squidward's face as he looked at his work and then looked away. But he kept going, and there's something quietly powerful about that. The bravery of continuing, the courage to keep caring, even when the applause never comes. Even when the world doesn't seem to notice. Sometimes, the greatest strength is hidden inside ordinary persistence. People who feel unseen often carry the deepest stories. They hold dreams like lanterns lit in dark rooms, hoping the light might reach someone. Squidward's lantern flickered often, but it never went out. And maybe that's why, underneath all the sighs, he remained a symbol of survival. Not dramatic survival, just everyday survival. The kind that doesn't make headlines, but still matters deeply. Squidward's pain wasn't loud. It was real, and it made his rare smiles mean even more. It didn't end there. Something even softer was waiting, the possibility of connection right next door. And that's where the story gently heads next. When we were kids, Squidward just seemed grumpy. He was the character who rolled his eyes, slammed the door, and wanted everything to be quiet. But somewhere along the way, something changed. We grew older, and suddenly, he didn't feel like the villain anymore. His sighs made sense. His tired voice sounded familiar, and his need for space didn't seem rude. It seemed human, but that wasn't the strange part yet. It's hard to notice the moment when a cartoon character becomes relatable. It doesn't happen all at once. It sneaks in slowly, usually during a real-life moment when your energy is low and your to-do list is long. Maybe after a workday that stretched too far, or after feeling like effort didn't equal appreciation. Then suddenly, Squidward isn't just noise. He's reflection. That feeling stayed. The more life presses down, the clearer his quiet pain becomes. Those early mornings, when you already feel behind. Those evenings when hobbies become chores. Those little dreams that used to shine brighter, but now live in the background like faded wallpaper. You might have felt something like this before, sitting alone at a table, hearing distant cars outside, wondering when rest stopped feeling natural. But that wasn't where it ended. Realizing you relate to Squidward isn't sad. It's a sign of growing, of seeing the world with new eyes. It might even be a form of empathy. Maybe understanding him means understanding yourself a little better. It means realizing that being tired doesn't make you cold, and needing space doesn't make you unkind. It makes you human. Sometimes it's okay to feel worn out, to sigh, to go slower, to not have answers. Squidward reminded us that people carry stories most of us never hear, and that some hearts speak loudest in silence. And maybe that's why SpongeBob and Patrick mattered so much to him, even if he rarely admitted it. Their joy might have annoyed him, but it also reached him. There were subtle moments when Squidward let his guard down, when a sunset looked nice, or when he listened to SpongeBob without interrupting. It didn't fix everything. It didn't erase his worries. But it hinted that comfort still existed, that friendship didn't have to be perfect to be real. Sometimes, being near people, just near them, is enough. As adults, we start to understand that connection doesn't solve all problems, but it does soften them. Having someone next door, someone who knocks even when you don't answer, someone who believes you're worth trying for, that kind of presence can change the air in a room. SpongeBob never forced Squidward to feel okay. He simply stayed close. And sometimes, that's all a person needs. Growing up often means accepting that we might become Squidward at times. We might feel misunderstood, or tired, or lost in routine. But it doesn't mean life stops being meaningful. It just means meaning shows up in different shapes. In a small hobby, in a brief smile, in a friend who drifts by at the right moment. Bikini Bottom didn't treat Squidward like a villain. It treated him like a neighbor. And maybe that was the lesson we missed as kids. He wasn't there to ruin the fun. He was there to remind us that life has layers, and every layer deserves compassion. This realization doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives softly, almost unnoticed, like distant laughter through a wall, or a clarinet echoing through water at dusk. It didn't end there. Something gentler waited just ahead. A quiet discovery about the comfort hiding inside routine. And that's where the next chapter begins. SpongeBob's days rarely changed. He woke up, greeted the morning with optimism, went to work, visited his friends, and came home to rest. The pattern stayed the same, no matter what else happened. As kids, we hardly noticed the repetition, but maybe that was the whole magic of it. It made life feel steady, predictable, safe. But that wasn't the strange part yet. There's something quiet and comforting about routine, especially for people who carry anxiety. When the mind is loud, predictability can feel like a life jacket. SpongeBob's schedule never asked us to keep up with anything complicated. It didn't rush or overwhelm. It just moved forward at a soft, manageable pace. That feeling stayed. Watching his mornings felt like restarting a song you already knew the lyrics to. He brushed his teeth, made his breakfast, and began his day with the same excitement every time. The routine didn't make him dull. It gave him a reason to smile before the world woke up. You might have felt something like this before. A morning playlist, a favorite breakfast, a small habit that steadies your heartbeat before stepping back into reality. But that wasn't where it ended. Bikini Bottom didn't run on suspense. It ran on rhythm. Every episode followed a familiar structure. We knew who would appear, what the world looked like, how the day began and ended. Nothing unpredictable, nothing too sharp. And maybe that's why it soothed so many people who were secretly afraid of change. When life feels chaotic, repetition becomes refuge. And for many viewers, especially those who felt anxious or overwhelmed, SpongeBob's routine reflected the kind of life they quietly wished for, one where purpose was clear, friends were consistent, and the day always found its way to a gentle close. There's comfort in knowing what comes next. Even the sounds of the show became emotional anchors. The sizzling grill, the cash register's ding, SpongeBob's cheerful footsteps on the way to work. These sounds weren't just part of the setting. They were signals that his world had structure, a pattern, a pulse. Maybe that's why so many people watched the show during stressful times. After school, during late-night study sessions, on mornings when motivation felt distant. Bikini Bottom never demanded anything from the viewer. It just offered rhythm. the kind that quiets racing thoughts and reminds the mind that stability can exist. Repetition doesn't always mean boredom. Sometimes it means healing. A familiar routine gives the brain room to rest. It invites calm into places where worry usually lives. SpongeBob never treated routine as a burden. He treated it as a gift. Even his job, flipping patties, felt meaningful because it gave his days purpose. For people who struggle with anxiety, finding meaning in repetition can be powerful. It says you don't need a dramatic life to feel valuable. You don't need every day to be extraordinary. You just need gentle reasons to wake up, soft rhythms to follow, and a world that welcomes you at your own pace. Bikini Bottom held all of that. It wasn't unpredictable or intimidating. It felt safe. It showed a life built not on grand achievements, but on everyday presence. And maybe that's why so many of us wished our own lives looked even a little bit like SpongeBob's. Not perfect, just steady. The show didn't cure anxiety, but it gave tired minds a place to rest. And in a world that constantly pushes forward, sometimes the most comforting thing is knowing tomorrow might look the same. The same breakfast, the same sunrise, the same familiar rhythm. It didn't end there. That gentle pace soon found its most meaningful expression in SpongeBob's workplace, and that's where the story heads next. SpongeBob never chased status or fame. He didn't need a promotion to feel proud of his work. He simply loved the Krusty Krab, not because it made him successful, but because it gave his life shape. His morning energy wasn't forced. It was fueled by purpose, a reason to wake up, a reason to feel needed. That wasn't about ambition. It was about belonging. But that wasn't the strange part yet. For a lot of people, work becomes a weight when meaning disappears. It starts to feel like a loop instead of a rhythm. But SpongeBob treated his job like a heartbeat. Steady, familiar, life-giving. He tied his apron the same way every morning, smiled at the grill like it was an old friend, and greeted every customer with genuine excitement. Even the routine tasks felt special to him. That feeling stayed. The Krusty Krab didn't represent success. It represented purpose. And for people who feel lost in jobs or unsure about their future, this touches something quiet inside. The idea that maybe meaning isn't always found in big goals. Sometimes it's found in showing up for something small and giving it heart. You might have felt something like this before, finishing a simple task and feeling a sense of honest pride. But that wasn't where it ended. The sounds of the Krusty Krab became familiar over time. The sizzling grill, the cash register's quick ding, the bell on the door ringing every time a customer arrived. They weren't noises. They were rhythms. They were proof that SpongeBob mattered in his little corner of the world. His job wasn't glamorous, but it grounded him. It was his anchor in the flow of each day. Life often tells us to chase more. Bigger roles, higher titles, faster results. But SpongeBob showed a softer truth. Joy sometimes comes from the simple act of doing something with care. Not perfection, just presence. His work didn't make him rich, but it made him whole. For viewers who feel uncertain about their careers or futures, SpongeBob offered quiet reassurance. Purpose doesn't always need to look impressive. It can simply be something that fits. A role that allows you to breathe. A rhythm that keeps you moving without drowning you. Some jobs won't change the world, but they might help you survive it. There were times when SpongeBob failed at his job. He burned food. He messed up orders. He panicked during rush hours. But he never gave up on the work itself. That resilience was not loud or heroic. It was gentle, and gentle strength can be the kind that lasts longest. Maybe work doesn't need to feel extraordinary to matter. Maybe it just needs to hold meaning for the person who does it. SpongeBob believed in the value of everyday effort, and his world supported that belief. The Krusty Krab wasn't perfect, but it gave him a place to be himself. Some people find that meaning in cooking, some in writing, some in helping others, some simply in completing a task with care. Purpose doesn't have one definition, it just asks for sincerity. SpongeBob had that. He worked with heart. And even though customers sometimes complained or money became a problem, he never let that dim his light. The Krusty Krab, through all its stress and noise, became a soft metaphor for purpose. It showed that a job isn't just a means to survive. It can also be a rhythm that holds your days together. SpongeBob found comfort in his routine, and maybe that's something many people quietly long for too. It didn't end there. When the day grew quieter and the sun started to lower, Bikini Bottom began to change. And that's where the story drifts next, in the calm of evening, when routine slowly transforms into rest. When evening settled over Bikini Bottom, everything slowed down. The colors turned softer, the streets grew quiet, and even the background music lowered like someone dimming the lights on a stage. The show didn't rush to the next moment. It allowed things to rest, and sometimes you could almost feel the ocean holding its breath. But that wasn't the strange part yet. Nighttime has a way of making silence feel different. Not empty, just deeper. Viewers who struggled to fall asleep might remember that soft shift in tone after sunset episodes began. There was no pressure to understand anything. The day was already done. Whatever happened, happened. Now there was only quiet. That feeling stayed. You might picture your own room at night while thinking of Bikini Bottom. The soft buzz of electronics, the distant sound of cars drifting down late roads, maybe a fan turning somewhere in the dark, brushing air across your skin. You don't have to speak. You don't have to solve anything. Night becomes a space between thoughts, a small bridge connecting what happened with what might come next. But that wasn't where it ended. SpongeBob's world didn't disappear after the sun went down. It simply rested. Jellyfish moved slower. Buildings glowed gently. The Krusty Krab's sign flickered like it was ready to sleep too. Even Squidward, after one last sigh, turned off his lamp and trusted the night to do its job. It was quiet, but not lonely. Still, but not empty. For people who think heavily at night, these quiet scenes might have offered relief. They didn't ask anything of you. They simply existed. No noise, no demands, just a moment of stillness. In a way, Bikini Bottom became a mirror of your own thoughts. The world outside slowed down, and your heart followed. Sometimes, the most comforting thing isn't a story. It's a feeling, the sense that somewhere, even inside a cartoon, nighttime can be safe. SpongeBob wasn't always laughing in these scenes. He was silent too, maybe brushing his teeth, maybe watching the stars through his window. His joy didn't disappear, but it became gentle, like a blanket pulled just a little higher. Night episodes often made Bikini Bottom look almost real, Not realistic, but recognizable. Lamps glowing in windows, houses settling into silence. Even the quiet space between lines of dialogue began to feel familiar. The kind of quiet that shows up at 1 a.m. when the world expects nothing from you. No homework, no jobs, no explanations. Listeners who struggle to sleep know this feeling well. Your mind drifts from one thought to another. You remember a moment from years ago for no reason. You try to slow your breathing. You pull your blanket closer. You might stare at the ceiling or trace the patterns in your bedsheets. SpongeBob's nighttime scenes captured that quiet drifting without ever naming it. And as you watched, maybe you felt less alone. The underwater town kept floating through its night, just like your mind kept floating through yours. No rush, no judgment, just slow time, soft time, the kind that helps thoughts loosen and drift away. Even if sleep didn't arrive, rest did. Night doesn't demand answers. It only asks for presence. And Bikini Bottom, as silly as it could be, understood that. That's why its nighttime scenes mattered. They didn't push the story forward. They allowed the heart to pause. And sometimes, pausing is the most important part of the day. It didn't end there. Dawn always followed. Morning always returned. But for now, there was only the hush of the ocean, the echo of slowed footsteps, and a few hours of calm floating right in the middle. And that's where the quiet carries us next. Night has a way of bringing back things we thought we'd forgotten. Not loud memories, quiet ones. A certain smell from childhood, a face we haven't seen in years. The sound of laughter coming from another room long ago. It arrives softly, usually when the lights are low, and your mind is finally slowed down. That's when the past drifts closer, like it's been waiting in the hallway all day. But that wasn't the strange part yet. Around midnight, memories seem sharper. Not painful, just louder. A sentence someone once said. A moment you thought meant nothing back then. The way sunlight hit the carpet on a Saturday morning. They return for reasons we don't always understand, but the stillness of night leaves space for them to surface. And in that space, you can almost feel time folding over itself. That feeling stayed. SpongeBob had episodes like that too. Slow ones. The kind that didn't aim for laughter, just presence. Scenes that felt like dreams you almost forgot. He'd walk quietly through the town, or gaze at something for longer than usual. The music would soften, the pace would slow, and suddenly, the show felt less like a cartoon and more like a memory. You might have felt something like this before, when bedtime becomes less about sleep and more about drifting. But that wasn't where it ended. It's tempting to fight memories when they return at night. To push them down. To tell yourself you should be asleep by now. But sometimes, the mind just wants to revisit places before it rests. Not to solve anything, just to remember. The soft glow of a lamp, the hum of a fan, the quiet between breaths. These things create openings where old memories tiptoe back in. Maybe that's why nighttime feels so familiar. It mirrors the ocean in SpongeBob's world. Slow, rhythmic, slightly mysterious. Nothing urgent, nothing demanding, just a gentle current carrying thoughts from one place to another. Some memories might hurt, others might heal, but all of them are real, and ignoring them doesn't make them disappear. They just wait for the next quiet hour. People who replay their day before falling asleep know this well. Thoughts unfold slowly, like pages turning in a darkened room. You picture a hallway from your school, a song you used to love, a friend you never got to say goodbye to. They don't arrive with answers, only with presence. And sometimes, presence is enough. SpongeBob's world offered permission to let thoughts wander. It never rushed the viewer. It let silence speak, especially in late episodes when everything felt softer. Those moments felt like underwater echoes, memories that moved not in straight lines, but in waves. Viewers didn't need to organize those thoughts. They just needed to float with them. And maybe the real beauty of nighttime is that it doesn't judge your thoughts. Whether they're joyful, confusing, or somewhere in between, the night simply holds them, like shallow water that's safe to stand in. You don't have to dive. You just drift. Acceptance doesn't always mean understanding. It means letting the thoughts come and go without turning them into puzzles. SpongeBob's gentle pacing taught us how to do that, without lessons or speeches. Just atmosphere. Just calm. Just enough silence to let emotions stretch their legs. Night doesn't always bring sleep right away. Sometimes it brings memories first. And that's okay, because memories aren't interruptions. They're reminders. Reminders that you lived, that you felt, that even the quietest days left traces behind. It didn't end there. As the night deepens and thoughts quiet further, another kind of peace begins to surface. And that's where the story drifts next, toward the gentle comfort found in the smallest things. Bikini Bottom never tried to be perfect. It just existed, moving at its own rhythm, following its own strange logic. Small buildings, odd characters, simple routines, and yet it always felt alive. There was comfort in that. It showed that a place doesn't have to be grand to feel like home. It just has to be steady. But that wasn't the strange part yet. Sometimes peace arrives in small shapes. A lamp turned low, a familiar voice on the TV, a cup of tea cooling beside your bed. These moments don't fix anything, but they soften the edges of the day. They gently remind you that you're still here, still breathing, still allowed to rest. That feeling stayed. Bikini Bottom captured that feeling without needing explanation. SpongeBob went to work, visited friends, and returned home to quiet evenings that often faded like watercolor. Squidward played his clarinet, even when he struggled. Patrick floated through the day, finding joy in whatever he touched. They weren't chasing perfection. They were living. And somehow, that felt enough. Sometimes the mind demands answers. It wants clarity, reason, closure. But peace doesn't always look like understanding. Sometimes it's just acceptance, the kind that lets the day end without revisiting every mistake. You might have felt something like this before, lying in bed with the sound of distant cars or the slow turning of a fan above you. You don't solve anything, but for a moment you feel okay. But that wasn't where it ended. Bikini Bottom didn't promise control. It offered something quieter, reassurance. The idea that everyday life, with all its bumps and pauses, could still be meaningful. That a good day didn't have to be extraordinary. It could be simple, predictable, gentle, the kind of day that leaves room for sleep at night. The older we get, the harder it can be to find that kind of calm. Stress replaces curiosity. Pressure replaces play. But SpongeBob's world kept showing a softer way of being, one built not on success, but on presence. The ocean didn't rush. The characters didn't compete. They simply woke up and tried. Even when things went wrong, the world didn't fall apart. Episodes ended. Sunsets returned. Tomorrow always came, waiting patiently like a quiet friend. And maybe that's what makes the show feel special after all these years. It never tried to change your life. It just made it a little easier to face. Listeners searching for calm often don't need instructions. They need permission. Permission to slow down, to feel tired, to not have all the answers. SpongeBob's world offered that silently, through the way its days began and ended with quiet consistency. A soft reminder that rest isn't earned. It's needed. You don't always have to grow in big ways. Sometimes growth is simply breathing through the night and waking up ready to try again. Maybe that's enough. Maybe it's always been enough. And if tonight was heavy, maybe the smallest things can still carry you forward. The memory of a cartoon playing in the background. The image of a pineapple house lit softly from within. The way laughter once felt light, in a room filled with friends and open snacks. Those images don't fade completely. They linger like lanterns in the dark. Bikini Bottom was never a destination. It was a feeling, a gentle reassurance that even on the hardest days, there's still room for softness. And with that thought, the ocean grows just a little quieter. The night settles over the town like a warm blanket, and that calm leads us into the next chapter, where peace doesn't just exist outside, but inside. The story continues there, and that's where we drift next. Maybe SpongeBob was never just a cartoon. Maybe every character quietly represented a different part of growing up. The parts we don't always talk about, but still carry with us. SpongeBob's endless optimism, Patrick's gentle loyalty, Squidward's quiet exhaustion, even Mr. Krabs' fear of losing what he worked hard for. They weren't written as metaphors, but sometimes meaning slips through the cracks anyway. But that wasn't the strange part yet. Looking back, those characters start to feel familiar, almost like reflections. They weren't perfect, and they didn't pretend to be. They simply lived through days that felt real, even in a place as imaginary as Bikini Bottom. You might remember certain episodes, not because of the plot, but because they echoed parts of life you didn't yet know how to name. That feeling stayed. SpongeBob represented that piece of us that wants to believe good things are still possible. The part that wakes up hopeful, even after a heavy day. He didn't always make sense, but joy rarely does. Patrick showed another truth. Sometimes presence matters more than understanding. Loyalty without reason. Friendship without conditions. The kind of comfort you don't even notice until you need it. Squidward carried something different. He reminded us that life can get tiring, even when nothing is technically wrong. His sighs weren't complaints. They were evidence of someone still trying. The dreams he held onto weren't grand. They were personal, and maybe that's what made them so powerful. They felt like dreams many of us once had and quietly tucked away. Then there was Mr. Krabs. Not greedy, just afraid. Afraid of losing what he built. Afraid of scarcity. Afraid that one wrong step might erase everything. Many adults know this fear well. It grows as responsibilities grow. SpongeBob didn't villainize him. It simply let him be complicated, like people are. Each of these characters carried an emotion we often feel, but rarely speak about. And maybe that's why the show stayed in our minds long after cartoons were supposed to fade away. Bikini Bottom didn't offer answers, but it held space. A space where different parts of the human heart could exist together without judgment. Some shows ask us to think. SpongeBob asked us to feel. Not deeply, not intensely, just enough to recognize something familiar in the silence between jokes. Scenes unfolded gently, giving us room to breathe. And like flipping through old photos, meaning only appeared when time passed and life changed. Maybe that's how stories work. Meaning arrives later, when we're older, when memories blur with real experiences. Suddenly, Squidward looks like a coworker. Patrick reminds us of a friend we miss. SpongeBob sounds like our younger self trying not to give up. And somehow, Bikini Bottom starts to resemble home. None of these characters were perfect. That might be what made them special. They showed that life doesn't have to be flawless to be meaningful. That trying is still worth it, even when nobody sees the effort. That laughter still matters, even when it doesn't solve anything. And that love can exist quietly, even inside a pineapple, a rock, or a tired house next door. The story of SpongeBob was never about one character. It was about the way every character represented a different way of being human, even when we didn't notice it. Especially then. Through them, the show whispered a quiet truth. You don't need to be extraordinary to be important. You just need to be real. And real life, like Bikini Bottom, comes in many forms. It didn't end there. Something deeper waited beneath those currents. Something about silence, memory, and the space inside us that still searches for meaning. And that's where the story gently drifts next. What if the quietest parts of the show were the most important? Those scene transitions, the slow pans across empty streets, the drifting shots of jellyfish without any dialogue. Those moments often held more feeling than the loud ones. They gave the mind a chance to rest, to absorb, to breathe. But that wasn't the strange part yet. There was always a softness in the calm between episodes, as if the ocean itself knew how to hold silence. The music would fade to a gentle hum. Bubbles rose slowly through the water, and everything seemed to pause without asking permission. You didn't need to understand anything. You just needed to feel present for a moment. That feeling stayed. Lifelike moments often hide in transitions. The walk home after school, the silence between songs on a playlist, the pause before sleep when the room grows still. SpongeBob's world captured those spaces, the ones where nothing happens, but everything settles. They were like emotional breathing room, giving viewers time to rest without realizing it. You might have felt something like this before, when the day paused long enough for you to finally hear your own heartbeat. But that wasn't where it ended. As kids, we might have overlooked these scenes. We waited for the next laugh or plot twist. But as we grew older, they started to feel like the parts that mattered most. They resembled real life. Not the big memories, but the small ones. The feeling of walking slowly through a hallway after everyone else has gone home. Sitting on a bus and staring out the window, letting a moment exist without trying to control it. Those quiet scenes were reminders that peace doesn't always look impressive. Sometimes it's just stillness. A muted sky, a living room lamp glowing after dinner, a window left half open, letting in the night air. Bikini Bottom wasn't always dramatic. It was often peaceful, quietly humming with life in between the loud moments. That tone made the show strangely human. The pause between episodes felt like drifting in shallow water. Thoughts could float without urgency. Feelings didn't need names. Even kids who didn't know how to express stress might have found subtle relief during those transitions. It wasn't therapy, but it was space. And space can heal too. Life often moves faster than our hearts can handle. But SpongeBob never rushed. It understood that meaning often blooms in silence. The quiet after laughter, the moment after a hug, the slow return to normal after excitement fades. These transitions aren't empty. They're connective tissue, the invisible thread holding memories together. The calm between episodes may have taught us something gently, that it's okay to drift, that thoughts don't always need to be linear, that emotions don't need labels to be real. You don't have to justify every quiet moment. Sometimes stillness is enough. The underwater transitions captured that better than words could. Just bubbles, soft music, and a fade to the next scene. It felt like breathing out slowly, like the world was exhaling with you. And even now, as adults, that idea still reaches us. Because quiet doesn't always mean loneliness. Sometimes it means rest. Bikini Bottom held silence the way the ocean holds water, firmly, patiently, with no need for explanation. And maybe that's why those transitions felt strangely sacred. They weren't plot points. They were pauses, and pauses can matter more than most endings. The calm between episodes wasn't filler. It was foundation. And sometimes life feels that way too, not defined by events, but by the spaces between them. It didn't end there. Just beyond those soft breaths lay something deeper. The reason nostalgia still lingers after the screen turns dark. And that's where the story gently moves next. Some people hold onto childhood memories like anchors, not because they want to go back, but because they need something steady to hold on to when the present feels too heavy. Nostalgia isn't always an escape. Sometimes it's a lifeline. It helps the mind remember that there were once softer days, days when things felt lighter, even if nothing was perfect. But that wasn't the strange part yet. There's a comfort in remembering but because our hearts were still learning what worry meant. SpongeBob became one of those memories for many people, a familiar voice that stretched across time, a reminder that life once felt simpler, that laughter could fill a room even if nothing special was happening. That feeling stayed. Nostalgia doesn't have to mean living in the past. Sometimes it just means visiting it for a moment, like reopening a photo album or hearing the intro to a cartoon theme song during a late-night scroll, just enough to remind the heart of its earlier rhythm, the one that beat a little slower, the one that didn't rush. SpongeBob's laughter wasn't profound, but it was consistent. His optimism didn't solve problems, but it made problems feel smaller. And for adults who carry quiet burdens, like stress, loneliness, or pressure, those memories become emotional anchors, not to hold them back, but to hold them steady. You might have felt something like this before, returning to a song, a show, or a scent because it helped you breathe easier. But that wasn't where it ended. Nostalgia often surfaces at night, when life slows and thoughts begin to wander. The brain reaches back, not to find answers, but to find warmth. Maybe you remember the crunch of cereal during summer mornings, or the flicker of TV light across the living room floor, or SpongeBob's voice echoing softly while homework waited on the table. These memories don't erase adulthood, but they cushion it. There is no shame in reaching back. It doesn't make anyone weak. It simply means their heart remembers a time when joy didn't require explanation. Nostalgia, in its gentlest form, is not about retreating. It's about grounding. It's the emotional version of pausing to steady your breath before moving forward again. Bikini Bottom holds that kind of warmth. It never tried to be complex. It just offered color, rhythm, and sincerity. And sometimes, sincerity is the rarest comfort of all. In a world that often demands results, SpongeBob offered presence. In a time when silence feels heavy, Patrick offered company. And when exhaustion sinks in, Squidward, without meaning to, reminded us that tiredness is allowed. Nostalgia isn't about pretending things were perfect. It's about remembering that certain moments felt real. And real moments are worth keeping close. Even when life grows louder, the quiet memories remain, like small lights across a dark sky, distant, but still visible, still guiding. Sometimes people worry they're stuck in the past if they revisit it, but maybe the past isn't a place you return to. It's a place that returns to you when you need it most. A memory isn't a cage. It's a compass. SpongeBob's world doesn't pull anyone backward. It simply whispers that it's okay to rest your thoughts for a while. The nostalgia we feel doesn't mean we want to rewind time. It means we want to remember how to breathe. And maybe that's the real purpose of stories like SpongeBob's, to steady our hearts long enough to begin again. It didn't end there. Beneath nostalgia's gentle glow lies something even softer. The quiet proof that thought and emotion can float together without resistance. And that's where the story drifts next. The ocean in SpongeBob's world never really stopped moving. Even when nothing was happening, the water kept drifting in the background. Gentle currents, slow waves, always shifting, never crashing. It felt like the world was breathing quietly beneath the surface. And maybe that rhythm wasn't just scenery. It was a reflection. But that wasn't the strange part yet. At night, the mind often moves the same way. Thoughts rise, drift, then fade. Not always in straight lines. Not always with answers. They just move. Softly, like underwater tides searching for somewhere to settle. For nighttime listeners, this can feel both familiar and overwhelming. But perhaps thoughts aren't meant to be controlled. Perhaps they're meant to be floated with. That feeling stayed. When we look at the ocean, we don't expect it to be still. We expect it to move naturally. We don't fight the waves. We let them pass. Maybe the mind deserves the same kindness. Stress and reflection aren't storms to conquer. They're currents to acknowledge. Instead of clenching to thoughts or forcing them away, we can let them drift the way jellyfish do. Quiet, directionless, but always moving forward. But that wasn't where it ended. Bikini Bottom offered a visual lullaby. Bubbles rising slowly, shadows stretching across coral and sand, the water whispering instead of roaring. SpongeBob's world didn't push the viewer to think harder. It invited the viewer to think softer. Thoughts didn't need to be solved. They just needed permission to exist, without judgment. Nighttime has a way of magnifying silence. The fridge hums softly in the dark. A car passes somewhere down the road. Maybe your blanket shifts when you breathe. These sounds don't demand your attention. They simply keep you company. The ocean in SpongeBob felt similar. It was never loud. It never tried to impress. It just continued existing with gentle purpose. That kind of rhythm teaches the heart something. Peace doesn't have to be silent. It can have movement. It can have space. It can carry you like a tide carries a leaf. Forward, but patiently. We don't need to fight thought. We only need to allow it to settle. Some people listen to fans, rain sounds, or soft TV static to fall asleep. SpongeBob offered its own version of that comfort, a visual white noise. Nothing sharp, nothing urgent, just a consistent underwater heartbeat that quietly told your mind it was safe to slow down. Maybe thoughts don't need to disappear. Maybe they just need softer surroundings. The ocean never erased its waves. It simply let them pass in their own time. And maybe humans are built the same way. The mind wants to move. The heart wants to be heard. But neither needs to rush. If you listen closely to your breathing, to the air around you, to the invisible currents of memory, you might notice a gentle truth. The mind already knows how to calm itself. It just needs enough stillness to remember. SpongeBob's ocean didn't give answers. It gave atmosphere, a quiet invitation to drift. And sometimes, drifting is enough. You can close your eyes and let the day loosen its grip. You can let thoughts move the way water does, without needing direction, without chasing solutions. Sleep doesn't always come from shutting things off. Sometimes, it comes from letting them flow gently until they fade naturally, like waves folding into shoreline, like bubbles rising just to disappear, like dreams approaching slowly instead of loudly. It didn't end there. Just beyond that slow tide waits the quietest place of all, the kind of peace that arrives not with questions, but with rest. And that's where the story goes next, toward the ending that doesn't need words to be felt. The world doesn't always need to be fast. It doesn't always need to be loud. Sometimes it can slow down for a night, just enough to let tired thoughts loosen their grip. As this story drifts toward its ending, imagine that quiet living room glow again. Maybe it's late. Maybe a blanket rests on your shoulders. The day is behind you, and nothing needs to be solved anymore. But that isn't the strange part yet. If you listen closely, you might hear the soft ambiance of Bikini Bottom, the slow echoes of waves, the calm hum beneath every scene, the kind of sound that doesn't demand attention, but gently holds it. Like the ocean is saying you're allowed to rest now. You don't need reasons. You don't need answers. You've already made it through the day. That feeling stayed. Sleep doesn't always arrive quickly. Sometimes the mind circles old memories, testing their edges, replaying their sounds. But maybe that's okay. Maybe tonight, you don't have to push them away. You can let them move gently, the way water drifts along the ocean floor. Not to solve anything, just to exist. Like characters walking between scenes. Like old music playing in another room. Like time taking a breath before tomorrow begins. But that wasn't where it ended. Think again of SpongeBob's pineapple lit softly from inside, the windows glowing like lanterns. Think of Squidward's clarinet echoing through water, uneven but honest. Think of Patrick resting under his rock, calm in his simplicity. None of them needed perfect days to sleep at night. They just trusted the ocean to keep beating while they rested. And maybe tonight, that's enough for you too. The ocean never stops moving, but it doesn't always crash. Sometimes it rests against the shore, almost still, like it's remembering patience. Your thoughts can do that too. They don't have to be loud to be real. They don't have to be neat to have meaning. They just need time to slow down, to drift, to fade gently into quiet. As you lie there, you might feel something soften. Your breathing becomes steadier. The air in the room feels calmer. You are still inside the day, but somehow beyond it too. That strange space, that soft space, the one that exists between wakefulness and sleep. It's the same space where Bikini Bottom once lived inside your mind, and maybe still does. You don't have to say goodbye to it. You can visit whenever you need to. Nostalgia isn't closing a door. It's leaving a light on in case you find your way back. That light might be a memory, a voice, a color from a cartoon, or just the quiet reminder that rest is allowed, even when life feels heavy, even when you don't have everything figured out yet. Tonight doesn't need closure. It only needs calm. Let the day drift away like a tide going out. Let the world lose its sharp edges. Let tomorrow take its time before arriving. Bikini Bottom may have been fictional, but the peace it brought was real. And maybe that's what stories are for. Not to explain everything, just to hold you long enough for sleep to find you. And if you're listening right now, with the lights low and the night stretching on, maybe this is your moment to breathe, to release whatever you've been carrying, to let quietness do its work. The tide is already pulling back. The world is slowing down, and somewhere underwater, tomorrow is quietly waiting to begin. Maybe we'll never find every lost episode, but maybe we don't need to. Some memories weren't meant to be proven, only remembered. If tonight felt calm, even just a little, then that's enough. Sleep well. Dream softly. Good night.